In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to use comments in Python. We have been using comments in previous lessons, but here I'm not only going to talk about comments, but also a couple of other things that relate to the concept of placing comments in your Python code. So first, as programs get bigger and more complicated, they obviously get more difficult to read. And it is often difficult to look at a piece of code and figure out what it is doing or why is it doing so. And it's always a good idea to add notes to your programs to explain in natural, plain English language what the program is doing. In Python, these notes are called comments and represented by the $ symbol. So here's a small example of placing comments in Python. So for instance, if I were to bring up my shell here by clicking on File, New File, and let me minimize this or make it smaller so we can see. So here, for example, if I were to begin writing code or create a small program in Python, I'd have to start with the $. So anytime I start with a $, Python first of all color codes it as in red, and as soon as I begin with the $, Python knows that this is a comment. In other words, Python will ignore this line while executing the code. So here, a simple example, I can say something like this is a print function, and I can say something like print, how's the weather today? And I can simply place a new line here, and I can do something like print, happy holidays. And I can always click on run and then run the module. Of course, Python wants me to save this first. I'm going to click OK. And it's going to run how's the weather today and happy holidays. Let me bring up my code here so we can also see this. And here's our simple code. So the comment first is obviously the first line, which is this is a print function. And then of course my code begins following that. If I need to place a line after the word today, I can simply say comma and then recall, it's the \n for the new line, and run the module again. Click OK to save, and this time Python displays a line between the two sentences. So simple concept of using comments. Okay, so let me close this for now. Similarly, every time you start writing code, you're going to place a comment such as compute the percentage of the hour that has elapsed, and then write your code, and then place another comment. And comments can be placed either as an individual line or right beside your code, as long as they start with the $, and that's important. Okay, choosing variable names. As long as you follow the simple rules of variable naming and avoid reserved words, you have a lot of choice when you name your variables. In the beginning, this choice can be confusing both when you read a program and when you write your own programs. Now, variable names can be, for instance, if I go to my shell here, can be x equals 5. Obviously, you've created a simple assignment statement. Or it could be _y _ equals 3. Okay, now this is the same thing as assigning a variable name. So depending upon the convention or your own choice, you can create using variable names. And you want to be consistent in your programs when you're creating and writing code and using variables. So for example, if you're using _y _ as one of your variable names, then all of the other variables that follow should follow the same consistency. And it's easier because as your code grows larger, you would know, or you can identify the _y _ or any letter that has an underscore implies it's a variable name. So this way you can pick and choose and define your own variable names. So here's an example of creating variables. For instance, if I were to say something like A equals 35, B equals 12.5, and C is the multiplication of A and B, and I can print C. So for instance, quickly, I can say A equals 35, B equals 12, for instance, and then finally C is the multiplication of A times B, and I can say print C. Of course, I need parentheses, and this will give me the result as 420. So here I've used A, B, and C as variable names. So the Python interpreter sees all three of these programs as exactly the same. So whether I use A, B, C as variable names, or I use hours, rate, pay as variable names, or I can use any other combination of text or numbers as variable names. But Python sees all of these as being the same. So as humans, we will most likely to understand the intent of the second program, for example, the hours, rate, and pay, as opposed to trying to figure out what A means, what B is, what C is. It's easier to see that hours equal 35. That means, okay, it's 35 hours. And then the rate is $12.5 per hour. And then I'm simply going to multiply or calculate my total pay, which is hours times the rate, and it will print the pay. Because, or you as a programmer can choose variable names that reflect the intent regarding what data will be stored in each variable. And we can always call these wisely chosen variable names as mnemonic variable names. So depending upon your own, again, requirements, it's easier to use the second type of naming conventions, in other words, which is easier to understand by humans. So as a programmer, you may want to create variable names like this, like the last option, the third option here, x1, q3, z9, and so on. But for another user who's looking at your code, would really not know or have no idea what you're essentially doing. So as a good programmer, you need to use something that makes sense. Okay, here are some reserved keywords in Python. When using variable names, you need to watch out for the reserved words. For instance, if I need to bring a list of all the reserved words in Python, I can simply type keywords. So here before the keywords, I need to call the help function. Once I call the help function, which is simply the Python help. So I can either bring up help on keywords, modules, symbols, topics, and so on. And notice within my shell, the help prompt is displayed. And here I can simply say keywords, and Python is going to give me a list of keywords such as false, none, true, and so on. Another way to bring keyword in Python is, for example, let me first quit out of this. It takes me to the shell prompt, and here I can say import keyword, and this is a module, and then I can simply choose keyword dot KW list, and this will list out the same keywords. So a couple of ways you can do it, but typically as a beginner you can always type help instead of parentheses, and this will give you the help menu. Now once you're in the help prompt, you can always type, for instance, modules. So if you need to take a look at all the modules in Python, and Python is going to give you all the modules, or the whole list of modules. So just a word of caution that you need to be careful about using keywords as variable names. Okay, at this point, the syntax error that you're most commonly or likely to make is an illegal variable name, like class and yield, which are keywords, or $, which contains illegal characters, for instance. And if you put a space in the variable name, Python thinks it is two operands without an operator. For example, bad name equals 5, and it will give you an invalid syntax. Let's try it. Let me first quit out of this and takes us to the shell prompt. So I can say something like bad name. So if I say 5, and it will say syntax error, because Python again is looking for the connection between bad and name and cannot find it. But if I were to use bad name as one word equals 5, okay, Python now understands that you are creating an assignment statement, and bad name is a variable. So just keep this in mind when you're working with variables. And here's a simple example. The runtime error you're most likely to make is a use before the definition, that is trying to use a variable before you've assigned a value. And this can happen if you spell a variable name wrong. For instance, here the principal is spelled P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L, and then you're multiplying, of course, and spelling the variable name incorrectly with the PLE at the end, and obviously this will generate an error. Similarly, if you were to use the word latex as L capital and then some words in lowercase and some in uppercase, obviously this variable is not the same as all lowercase latex, even though the word is the same, but Python is going to treat them as two separate variables. Some of these rules in mind when you're talking about variable, and I demonstrated how to use the help function, how to bring up the keywords, how to bring up the module list, and of course working with variables and using comments within your code. So practice, and let's move to our next lesson.